Megan Motzinger, and I'm highly allergic to surface conversations. So let's dig deep. Together, we'll explore creating meaningful habits, deepening our relationships, and cultivating more hope for a better inner and outer life. This is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
I started my professional career as a registered nurse, primarily working in the areas of emergency and intensive care and also oncology nursing. So from a professional setting, I was dealing with the grief of others from very early on, especially in those particular areas. But I had no idea fully about grief until, of course, I experienced it myself personally with the loss of my son. So I really started writing, to be honest with you, Morgan. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just trying to find a way through. But slowly it kind of transformed me, and it kind of morphed into something that I didn't expect to be doing at this point in my life. I was a very analytical, evidence-based person as a nurse. So this woo-woo fluffy stuff about gratitude kind of was a bit off-putting to me myself as I started to write about it. But so essentially it just started as a way for me to figure out how to get through all of it. And I felt compelled, I guess, to share it with others. And then it just kind of developed into a book, and then into speaking, and then into working with moms. It's just really grown from there. So now, I still see, as with everything that I'm doing, I still see my most important role is responding to the moms that email me.
Can you share some of the details around your experience with your son? Like, how old were you? How old was he? Other kids? What the circumstances were surrounding his death?
So I was a teenager when I had Stephen. I was in high school, very young, totally terrified. And Stephen was actually an identical twin, and his brother Matthew passed shortly after birth. And so from my very first day of motherhood, I was confronted with the balance of happy and sad. I was celebrating, the birth of Stephen. He was very premature, with his, his skin was transparent. They were both preemies, and also the death of Matthew. So throughout my life, that followed me. On every birthday, the day would be the birthday party, the evening would be the cemetery, and I looking back now, I really feel like I was being prepared for this role, because that's what I talk about, the balance of happy and sad, and, living life, understanding that balance, but not denying the sad part. So Stephen was a rising senior at NC State University, and he was a hockey goalie. And he had played a pickup game a couple of days before the 4th of July, and he took a hit to underneath his chest protector with a puck. And from what the medical examiner explained to us, he developed a blood clot in his lung. And so when he was swimming on the 4th of July with his friends, the blood clot moved, and then he passed. It was a very random, it's hard to explain, because he was kind of like this invincible kid. He was super, super athletic. Like, he ran 10K that morning. And so that was the 4th of July. And that kind of started us on that journey. So a very unexpected death, which absolutely brought me to my knees and shattered me into a million pieces, because I had grown up with him. I was a kid too. So we had a very unique relationship in that way. I dragged him in some cases to my nursing classes in university. And yeah, so that's kind of the start of it all.
So so you must have just been in your 30s then when he passed?
Yeah, so I turned 40. I was 39. I turned 40 a year after he passed. It was my 40th birthday. So
Hmm.
all of that happened to me before my 40th birthday.
What were those early days like for you?
Hmm. It was it was difficult to breathe, you know. It was hard to catch my breath. It was hard to imagine that I was ever going to find myself in a place where I could catch my breath. I remember going to bed at night and trying to will him to come to me in my dreams. You know,
It never works.
it doesn't. It does not work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but
Mm.
then when you least expect it, you get, some little thing that will happen, and you'll remember your Annie, and I remember my little Stephen, and I'm like, okay, you're there, just not when I expect you to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the early days for me, I'm sure much like you, I found it very difficult to talk to other people. And I think that's why I retreated to writing.
Mm.
Um, I, I remember going back. My other son, who's living in England now, he was also a hockey goalie. So 2 months after Stephen passed, I remember going back to the rink and having to let him get back on the ice, and it was terrifying. And so I think it's a good thing if you want to talk about it, the anxiety that bereaved
Mm.
parents have with their other children. And I had to internally keep talking to myself, like, what happened to Stephen was random, and this little boy out on the ice deserves a happy life. You cannot deprive him of what he loves. But nobody knew, while I'm standing at the glass, I am talking myself into letting the goalie stay on the ice. Um, that was a big hurdle for me. So I just, yeah, whatever you want to talk about, I think the more honest that we can be, the better. I think that helps other mothers who might listen to us.
Mm-hmm. I think a big question for so many parents and mothers is, when is it going to get better? And I know that that's not really a question that can have a solid answer because each person processes things differently. And you just brought up a really good point about the the way that Stephen passed impacted your relationship with the other children. And I had a different experience, obviously, because Annie's disease was genetic, and so I knew that my two other kids weren't going to die in the same way that she did. But it didn't mean that there wasn't still such an acute awareness of the fragility of life, that it just made me so hyper aware and hyper vigilant, especially in those early days with my other kids, while
Mm-hmm.
I was also trying to not drown myself.
Yeah. I think when you lose your child, you become very aware of the fact, as you said, the fragility of life, and that things can change in an instant. That caused a lot of anxiety for me early on that I really had to work through. And as I said, I had a lot of internal self talk. I'm sure people might have thought I was
Mm.
nuts because over in the corner of the arena by myself,
Mm.
just trying to get myself ready for his game to start and watch pucks being shot at him.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So the Okay, you said that you had a lot of anxiety that you had to work through. And I'm curious, apart from just what you're sharing of this being aware of your inner dialogue and talking to yourself in a particular way, what does it mean that you worked through your anxiety? What does that actually look like practically?
So I think the first thing was recognizing it, because I had always been a person with a plan B, C, and D. I had, and I think that stemmed from being such a young mother. Is I had to be kind of resilient in my resources and in everything that I did. So I had to always have kind of a backup plan, and I didn't have one for this at all. So I think I had to recognize the anxiety in myself first, because I always felt very self-reliant. I had to be honest with myself. Like, Kel, oh my God, you are completely broken. That's how I felt. And writing about it helped. Taking the time to write about it. I made meditation a part of my daily practice, where I think for the first few months I thought about everything else but meditation, but finally figured it out. um, I went to a grief counselor for the first year, and also realizing that I had no idea to how to get Brendan through this in a way for that was tuned into his developmental age. I had him go to grief counseling as well. And that kind of giving him that support network, I think, lessened my anxiety. Knowing that, because we had to even work on scenarios that he might face when he returned to school in September. People would ask about his brother, because he was very proud of his brother playing college hockey. And, so everybody knew that he had this great big brother. And so making sure that he was okay and ready to face the world, that kind of lessened my anxiety. But even now, years and years later, I find, and so he's over in England. He's a grown man now. He's got his stuff figured out. He doesn't need me worrying about him at all. He's a smart cookie. But even now, with the time change, if I text him and we don't kind of hear back, so I'll look to my husband, and we have this kind of unspoken thing. And I'm like, he's good, right? And my husband says, oh yeah, he's great. The time difference. He's probably at the pub. He's probably, and I'm like, you're right. He's probably at the pub. And then I'll get a text a little bit later. But there's just that brief instant with the unknown. And I have to be honest about it with myself, that I feel, oh my gosh, has something happened? Is there something wrong? And I used to beat myself up about that. But now I accept it for what it is. And I realize that it is because I love him so dearly. And when I get the text, I'm like, see, everything's good. And I kind of confirm it in my mind. So that has lessened over the years. I've feel like I've been able to let things go, but there are certain times where it creeps back up. And I observe it, I deal with it, and then I keep moving. That's what I try to do. Anyway, it's an imperfect process.
Have you ever wished you had a therapist or a best friend in your pocket, someone that you could hear from in the moment that you need it the most? Now you can carry a timely message with you wherever you go. Mindful moment cards hold up to traveling in your pocket. These cards that are smaller than a pack of gum are made from durable cardstock and hold up to lots of use. Each set includes 10 unique cards, each with a phrase to bring mindfulness to the moment, and a QR code that links to a short mindfulness audio for that specific topic. These cards are crafted to provide a motivational boost during challenging moments or whenever you could use a dose of positivity. Carry a card in your pocket to have access to a mindful message right when you need it. You can share with a friend or a coworker or your child. You can pack one in their lunchbox or sneak it into your teen's phone case. Leave it with a friend going through a hard time. You can find these for sale at morganmotsinger.com/shop to get your own set of mindful moment cards. It feels like it would be nice if grieving and anxiety and all the aftermath of going through something so life altering had a clear cut, linear path that you could be like, oh yes, I'm on step 5 of 25, and to have an idea of what's coming next and the tools necessary. And that's not how it works out at all. It's so different from person to person. I like what you said about being gentle with yourself as you watch your responses to certain things, that there needs to be so much tenderness with ourselves, as especially if it's something that we wish wasn't there, that we wish we didn't still do. Like, why am I still feeling like this? Or why am I still at this point? And it's so important for us to be so very tender with ourselves, because we've never done this before. We've never had this experience before. And so of course, why would we know how to do this perfectly? And if we're going to expect perfection from ourselves, it's really still just a way for us to say, there's got to be a way for me to not experience all the feelings that I'm experiencing, instead of just recognizing that all the feelings are a necessary part of what grief is.
Well, and I think that the messiness of it, and for a lot of women, they struggle with the messiness of things. They want order. But the messiness of it is just as much a part of it as anything. I mean, I think many days I felt like my life was like a ball of tangled Christmas lights. I just felt so out of control, and I had to cut myself some slack. I will tell you that, you were asking earlier about, some of the things I use, like meditation and stuff. A few weeks after Stephen died, I had to go to my primary care physician to get a refill for my thyroid medication. And my blood pressure was elevated, go figure, right? And they said, your blood pressure is elevated. Is there anything going on? And of course, I burst into tears and explained that Stephen had died. And my primary care physician had such a discomfort with, as I could see it on her face as soon as I said what was going on. And she immediately said, well, let me write you a prescription for something. And I want to say up front that for some people, they need that. And I fully support, if you feel like you need to have that kind of support and you discuss it with your family physician, great. But for me at that time, I was like, wait a second, I'm not depressed, I'm grieving, and there's a difference. And I have to feel these feelings. I don't want to, but I have to. I have to give this time. I have to sit with this, because he was too much. He was too big of a part of my life to gloss this over or push it down. I have to feel all these feelings. And, it would have been, at the time, it would have been easier for me to say, yes, yeah, I need you to numb me, because I felt like, when you skin your knee and those nerve endings right at the edge of your skin, everything is so tender. I felt like that all over my body. I felt like everything was sandpaper, but I had to feel it. And I guess that's part of it too, is that you have to accept that this is part of it. You have to go through it. You can't go around.
I totally agree with you that oftentimes medication can be such an important support of healing and processing the things that we're going through. And I wonder if sometimes that becomes the solution in place of more robust support. that
Mm.
medication should never be seen as like a panacea, like something that's going to just be the cure all, but really is just a small part of the overall puzzle. So I want to ask you about how this affected your relationships. You've touched a little bit on your relationship with your other son and working through your own anxiety, and how can you support him and make sure that he has the supports necessary. You touched a little bit on this kind of this unspoken dance that you and your husband do when you're feeling anxious or worried about him. But can you talk to me about maybe particularly in the early days, what grief looked like in your relationships, maybe somewhat in your inner circle, and then we can expand out to your larger community.
So to begin with, the immediate family. So my husband and my younger son, Brendan, we had to make a conscious decision. I know that you know the stats about how relationships evolve after you lose a child. I think it's over 50% of couples face some sort of marital difficulty or separation and divorce. So seeking the help of a licensed and professional counselor was important for that in that regard for us, because men and women grieve very differently. I don't think I fully understood, my husband, kind of out in the yard digging a hole or whatever he was doing. That was how he was processing things. And whereas I was writing and, maybe wanting to discuss things. So we had to give each other the space to grieve differently. We had to, and that was, when I didn't really understand how he was grieving, initially I felt like he wasn't grieving because he wasn't grieving like me, how the hubris of me, So once we talked it through, we recognized that we both had different approaches and both were okay. So, but we had to have that conversation, and it wasn't really that easy because we were both so sad. With my son, I sat him down and I said, I need you to understand something. I had an episode of anxiety after hockey I think someone had charged the net and they had knocked him down and he was just lying there. And my husband looked to his right where I was standing. We were up on a different level looking down at the ice, and I was gone because I was already down, like right by the boards. And after that game, he said, you seem upset. He recognized that I was kind of off. And I said, oh, I just got a little fright. And, and then I said, Bren, I said, that's not you. That's me. And I felt like, a lot of times we try to gloss things over for kids. But I didn't want him to walk away from that arena feeling like he had done something wrong that made me sad or anxious. So I said, this is just something I'm working through. And so sometimes I get a little anxious and it might seem like I overreact. But I'll get better. I'll get better with each passing day. I'll learn how to be better with this. But I just feel very protective over you. So immediate family, honesty is key. And even when it's difficult. For my extended family, it's funny. I had different experiences with all of my siblings. My brother, who lost his wife when she was 32, and he had two young boys that he had to raise. And I felt a deep closeness to him, and some of his own grief and lessons he shared with me. And I mean, if anybody out there has brothers, like sharing their feelings is not a high thing on the list. And it wasn't really typical for me, but he provided me with a great source of wisdom and reminded me. He used to tell me about the flickers of light and how to look for them during the day. So he was a big source of comfort for me. One of my other sisters and I, we struggled. She didn't know how to talk to me, and that was a struggle. Because the more that she struggled with how to talk to me, the more strained the conversation became. And it was, the first year was it was hard for us. So when I went to Newfoundland, where I grew up, that next summer, we sat and we hashed it out and kind of talked through it. And I explained to her, why I felt this way. And my best friend thought that she was never going to get me back. And I've known her since kindergarten. We've been best friends since 6th grade. She hated me until 6th grade. Can you believe that? Anyway.
How could anybody?
It's calling out to you, Tracy. No, I joke with her about that, but she didn't know how this was all going to turn out. And we sat and talked, and I was like, you know what? I didn't know how it was going to turn out either. I didn't know if you were going to see me ever again, because in the first 6 months, I could only talk to a few people. The first 3 months, I could barely go to a mailbox because I was afraid I was going to run into someone and they were going to try to talk to me and I was going to burst into tears, and I just didn't want to do it. So I just had to protect myself. So that's immediate family, extended family, my best friend, our larger friend group, or the other hockey families. It was very individual. There's a couple of people who never talked to me ever again. I know and I don't say that with any malice. They just didn't know what to do, and they didn't know what to say. And so they just didn't say anything. And, I get it. It was sad, but I get it. And then, other people just want you to kind of get back to normal and get back into the swing of things. And I remember on a Sunday morning standing with a bunch of hockey parents, and there was one dad just complaining about his son's ice time. And I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, really? This is what you've got to complain about in your life? Really? And I called it the rub. That's what I talk about a lot, the rub of, and again, no malice towards those people, because I was one of those people who probably talked about my son and his ice time, before all of this happened. But early on in my grief, I just felt the rub like sandpaper on my skin of people not getting it. A mother yelling at her child in Walmart. I'd be like, I'd want to go up to this woman and say, listen, don't you know life can change in an instant? Don't yell at this little girl because she wants this doll. So yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining it very well at all, but it was like, there were so many layers to it. There were some people who, without a word, I have a very dear friend who just showed up. She didn't say anything. I didn't expect her to say anything, but she was just there. She cooked, she cleaned my kitchen, which I applaud her for, because she was much better at cleaning my kitchen than I was. Yeah, so there's just so many different layers to it. And it all depended on the comfort level that person had with grief, what experience they had with loss themselves. I think if you have not lost someone, it's very scary to approach the subject with someone who's, and specifically for a mother who's lost a child. I think that that creates a whole nother dynamic for people.
Why do you suppose that is, that what's blocking people, do you suppose, from approaching people who have lost someone or are in grief?
I think I think honestly people are afraid that they are going to say the wrong thing and make things worse. I believe that. I sincerely believe that they feel they have the best intentions, that their silence is somehow kind of keeping us at an even keel. But what I would love for people to understand is that we will always be mothers to the children who we have lost. And so not saying anything sometimes hurts even more. I I love talking about Stephen. He was a pretty cool kid. And so I just, if anybody out there is listening and you're in that boat where you don't know how to cover, to comfort a friend, just showing up and saying you're sorry and that you're there for them. There's nothing that you can do to fix it. So don't walk into a situation expecting that any words are going to fix it, because that's just not going to happen. But what you can do is you can give people comfort. And you don't have to have a big speech to do that. All you need to do is to show up.
I wonder how much the hesitation too is because it's unpredictable. I mean, we, even for ourselves, like we were talking about the dreams that we're so desperate for our kids to pop into, or the signs that we look for, and that often it's such a surprise when we do have those things show up. And alongside that, like I'm often very surprised by the things that activate my deep sorrow and yearning. And so I feel even in myself this tension of unpredictability, of I'm not sure when something's going to kind of bowl me over. And I wonder if some of the hesitation that people have in approaching others is that they can also sense that unpredictability. It's like if I'm going to go and talk to someone and I know that they're going to be crying, it's like, okay, then I know what I'm getting into. But if I'm just approaching someone and I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen, there's this extra layer of almost like self-protection that comes in, where you're like, am I going to be able to handle whatever the response ends up being? And I echo what you said, just encourage people to be brave and to really believe that the silence, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, especially if you're a very well-intentioned and thoughtful person, the silence is oftentimes more painful than anything that you could say. I do think, as I've been doing some research, particularly around bereaved parents and bereaved families, there's a recurring theme of people who will say that people have said really, really stupid stuff to them, especially in the early days. And I'm curious from your own perspective and your own experience, if that's been the case for you, and then also how you would try and educate people on the appropriate or best things to say to someone who's grieving.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. So I've had people who have questioned my approach to grief, because I started very early on, using gratitude in what remained, not gratitude for what happened, gratitude for what remained, to clarify, to deal with my grief by finding one little thing each day. So that's what we did as a family. Not everybody understood that. And so I had some comments about that. And of course, that leads you to question your own kind of direction. Am I doing this the right way? And because there's lots of people who have very, I suppose, what they think are concrete answers about how you should be doing things. I remember the first Christmas there was a friend who wanted us to come to a Christmas party, and I couldn't do it. I could barely take the ornaments out of the box. So I'm kind of pushed to when I said politely, no thanks, we're going to, not do that this year, came back for a second circle around to see if they could get a yes. And I had to go, I remember going to the bathroom stall where we were and just having a little moment. Like, why can't you understand why I can't do this? Why? But again, unless you're in this circumstance, you don't understand. So there's a lot of online things, in particular with Stephen's passing, that were just actually prompted me to write the editor of the Raleigh News and Observer. And I actually went up to Raleigh and met with all the reporters, and pushed to have their policy changed about online commenting on articles, because someone who knew nothing about the circumstances of Stephen's passing said, well, he mustn't have been very much of an athlete if he couldn't even swim across the cove. And, that was an anonymous poster who, for whatever reason, spewed that. I feel bad for that person that they have that kind of stuff in their heart. So, it can come in a lot of different directions. But for the most part, they were few and far between. And I tried to give people grace. Because when I focused too much on the negative, like things that were happening, like that, like people saying off the wall things or online commenting or whatever, I couldn't feel Stephen around me. When I focused on the positive, I felt him around me. So I gave people grace. And I'm sure some people would think that I was the bigger person, but I actually think it was for my own selfish gain, right? Because I felt Stephen around me when I was at peace. And I just wanted him around me.
I love that so much. You said something earlier about how difficult it is to let people see our mess, to see us in the messy spots.
Mm-hmm.
How did you navigate that for yourself? And like, what did some of the messy spots look like that you did either not let people into, or the times when you did let people in to see those really messy times?
So what was interesting for me is that prior to Stephen's death, and to a certain extent, I still am a very private person. And when Stephen died and I started to write, and then I said, I think I'm going to blog. I think I'm going to put this out there. I don't care. I actually didn't give a crap about anybody at that point. You guys, no one can hurt me now. I'm at a point where you cannot hurt me because I am already shattered into dust. So here we go. I'm putting my words out there. So, for the first time in my life, I laid it all out there without a care in the world about what anybody thought about me. I'll give you an example. So, as I mentioned earlier, Stephen was an identical twin, and his brother Matthew died at birth. So, the first time I told that story was after Stephen died. There was components of that story that my best friend did not know. I had carried that with me all those years. And when I finally shared it, and because I wanted people to understand the full picture. I wanted to be honest about it. Yeah, showing my mess was freeing. I guess I just said, yeah, here it is. I'm laying it all out here. But it also meant that on hard days, people would see me get emotional in Target, crying.
What is it about Target?
I don't know. I don't know if it's like sparks some sort of emotional response, but I mean, I was in the automotive section and I had one of the washcloths for a vehicle up to my face, like drying my tears. I felt like I had to purchase it after because it had kind of my
you can't leave your DNA there.
well, or my mascara, right? So
yeah.
it was, I guess I just felt like there's nothing else to lose for me. Life's messy. Let you see my mess. I felt that was the most honest way to do it. And if I was going to tell people about using gratitude in grief, I had to be honest about it. I had to. I couldn't, if I wasn't honest about it, it would have just been fluff, right? I didn't want it to be fluff. Stephen was too important for that. I couldn't have fluff.
I have a similar emotional response in Target when I walk past the little girl section and see things that I would have bought for Annie.
Oh, yeah.
It still gets me. So Target for me too. I like this idea of showing people the mess, because like the phrase that came to mind is like, what can these mere mortals do to me? Like I've already like plumbed the depths of this heartache and this grief and the anger and the sadness and all that. And so like, there's no way that something that somebody says online is going to take me there to that deep, dark space.
Yeah.
It's just, it's impossible. Like I've already faced that and seen it. I think that's a really helpful reminder. But I also see the benefit to showing people our mess, because it's in the same vein as when I was talking about how medical or pharmaceutical interventions are can be a very important and helpful part of grief support, but it's also that our relationships can be deepened so much when we let people into those very tender moments and very tender areas of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think there's an opportunity there. And I actually, that's a very good point. That was an area of growth for me in a weird way. Of letting people see kind of the underbelly of my life. Whereas before I was very protective over that. I always felt like, especially being a teenage mom, I always felt like I had something to prove. And so showing any weakness was not something I was willing to do. I was going to make things work. And so, but I realized that also kept people at arm's length. And when I just kind of let it all hang out, and said, here I am, and I'm a mess. And that's when people felt safe enough to reach back out to me. When I started to blog, and I was brutally honest about what I was feeling, because what's the point of blogging if you're not going to be honest? Like, what? I don't know. I just felt like I owed it to myself, to Stephen, to anybody who read it. On the most painful posts, that's when I would get the emails from the moms, when I was honest. And I always would say, and I still believe this with all of my heart, that I wrote to them from my darkness and they replied from theirs, and together we healed each other. And somebody has to take the first step and be honest. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I really like what you said about writing came first before the sharing. Like I think a lot of people think if I'm going to write something, then I have to make sure that it's available to others to read or whatever. So like having a blog or writing a book or whatever. But it sounds to me like first it was just the therapy of writing for yourself, and then eventually that became something that you shared online. Am I understanding that correctly?
Um, yeah, I did start to share very early on. Um, but there was so many pieces of it. Like when I look at my blogs and I look at my books, for every entry that you would read in my books, there's probably 5 that I kept to myself. And that was between my boy and me. That was my conversation with him. And I didn't have to share that with anybody. And it helped me work through just the seismic shift in my life. And it also helped me say thank you to him for everything that he gave me as my son. He, I feel like we were a very expressive family, so I feel like he knew. But as a mom, you never feel like your kids truly understand just how much you love them. No, listen up. I love you more than you could ever imagine. So, in many ways, that private writing was my love letter to him. Just thanking him for all the bits that I thought I had time to thank him for in person, but I didn't. So I wrote that.
That's beautiful. You said that your brother is the one who wrote this phrase down to look for the flickers of light throughout the day. Can you talk more about that?
So we were chatting, and we were talking about his first wife, Kay, who passed away from cancer, and how he felt. And he had 2 little boys to raise, 7 and 3, I think, 7 and 4. So he had a very challenging path. And I was telling him, and it was so funny because of all the people I thought I would openly weep with, he was not one of them, being my big brother. But I did. I cried buckets with him, and he just listened to me. And he told me a story about his boys being in the car with them. And he was talking about kind of the dark night. I don't know. It was related to something that happened to one of the kids. They were talking about the dark sky. And he kind of put it to them about the flickers of light, how the stars all come on and you see these little flickers of light. And when the night first arrives, there's only one. But as you continue to watch, another star appears and another star appears. And he likened that to grief, that at first it's just the night sky. But as you lean in and as you get further down the road, there's more flickers of light, and you'll start to notice them until finally you reach the dawn. And it just stuck with me because that's really how it unfolded for me. It didn't happen all at once. I'm still discovering flickers of light all these years later. There's still moments where I feel like it's very dark. Something will hit me. And I like to call that the rogue wave of grief, right? So you're going along and everybody's fine, and all of a sudden you are just hammered with something that just derails you. But then I'll discover a flicker here or there. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining that well, but it certainly gave me hope. I guess I started to look for those flickers after he said that to me.
Yeah, that's a really, really, that's beautiful imagery that, we spent some time watching a couple summers ago with the kids. We laid on the back deck when it was dark because there was supposed to be a meteor shower. And, at first it's really hard to see because your eyes haven't adjusted yet to the darkness, and it's like, as you sit outside longer, your vision adjusts to the darkness. And I I like that idea of that as we adjust to this new darkness too, that we see things that we didn't know were there all along.
Yeah.
It's the stars haven't gone anywhere, even though I see a blue sky. They're just
Exactly.
they're outside of my field of vision. And I think one of the gifts of grief is that attunement to what's been there all along. It's like what you said about seeing the mom yelling at her kid in Walmart.
Yeah.
Our knowledge, our awareness of how short life is and how important our relationships are and how much connection and love are the most important things that we have access to. We all know that all the time, but it's almost like it's only when we're sitting in the darkness long enough that we start to become more aware of it. And I'm curious, like, how it's been for you over time. I'll have to preface this question by saying that sometimes I long for the early days because even as painful as they were, I was so much more in my life, if that makes sense. Like, sometimes I long for that sense of closeness to myself and to Annie and to just like the tenderness of life. I don't really want to go back to those early days because they were terrible, but it's surprising to me sometimes how quickly I can forget.
That's I can totally relate to that. So when I think about that night that we got the call about Stephen, and it was the 4th of July, and we're driving 9 hours to get to this lake, and the fireworks are going off. All the communities that we are passing, fireworks are going off, and I'm thinking, oh, they're welcoming Stephen to heaven. That's kind of how I had to gauge my brain to make it through that drive. But I described it as I felt like God shot a flare into the night sky of my life, and everything that was important was revealed to me. And I was scrambling to write it all down before it dissipated. And I will tell you that there have been several times over the years that, again, not longing for those early days of pain, but certainly yearning those early days of awareness. I always describe that first year after losing Stephen as the most awake year of my life. And I was very grateful for that because it realigned all of my priorities. But there are times in those early days when I was writing that I felt so connected. And then over the years, for one reason or another, life, I found myself not connected and really wondering, am I going to be able to get back to that? Am I going to, I want to feel that again. I want to feel that connection. So, over the years, I've made some conscious decisions. I live a very quiet life because that allows me to stay connected to that feeling. I have beautiful friends. who I'm sure wonder why I say no more than I say yes sometimes to social engagements. And it's not because I don't love them. Um, but I just can't anymore. I, I, I stay quiet so I can stay aware.
Hmm. It's such an interesting tension to feel in the solitude, the connectedness to all things, and then also that in practice that means close connections in our relationships, which then means not being alone.
Yeah.
Like, disrupting the solitude for that. And it's, it's a funny dance between those two things.
It is a delicate dance because, part of my work is telling people how
Mm.
community is important. And um, there are times that, there's times that the community will help you through, and then I'm not practicing what I preach. That's
Mm.
that's my mess, right? Um, there are times where I push myself to be more social, and I struggle with that sometimes. Yeah.
Mm.
I know it's necessary, and I know that I always feel good after I do it. Um, yeah, but sometimes you just feel like such a changed person. You're not sure if you can engage.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's like a lot of the material things have this like lackluster to them now. It's like it just doesn't cut it the same way. Like I was an interior designer for many years, and I don't know that I talk about this very much in when I closed that business to go back to school. Part of it was because I just had lost interest in so much of the material. Like as much as I still believe in the power of our home environments to foster deep connection and rest, I just was like, I can't look at another sofa in the same way. It's like I can't shop in the same way that I used to.
Yeah.
And the thrill of it really was so diminished because I had tasted and touched something that is not accessible through this, and it's a really difficult thing to explain. Like you said, like the longing for the early days when you were so awake and aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think for me too, um, I think about I think about other people's comfort, and sometimes I know in certain situations I wonder about how comfortable they would be. I don't know, like I think they sense that I'm different, or that I look at things in a very different way. And for example, when my son's friends started to get married, and we stay in touch with them, and they're beautiful, beautiful people. And we were invited to all of their weddings. And there was a few that for whatever reason we couldn't go, but there was a couple in particular that I thought, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this because it hurt me, but also I was afraid that it would hurt them to see me there.
Mm.
And yeah, that's a whole nother layer as well of mess.
Yeah.
And, they're beautiful souls, and I know that they understood. But, I found myself beating myself up a little bit that I couldn't be stronger and push through. But I at the end of the day, I couldn't. I had to protect my mental health, I guess.
Yeah, that's, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about grief and the huge disservice this idea of resilience has done to our mental wellness. Like this idea of, and I'm sure that you've experienced this, like that there's so much praise for being strong and like getting back to life and moving forward or moving on. There's a real celebration in our culture about being able to like bounce back. And like what a weird thing to celebrate. Why would we celebrate people pretending like the most life altering thing didn't happen and that we could just like continue business as usual?
That's interesting, because I actually I view resilience in a completely different way. I see resilience as not like coming back from something stronger than before. I see resilience as learning to walk with what happened to you and being able to share it with other people so they can maybe learn something from your journey. I don't see it as I've bounced back. No, 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 no. I'm different. And I think that being able to show up and being able to say, today I'm okay, tomorrow I might be a mess, but I'm here and I'm going to be honest with you about it. I think that is what is resilient. That resilience as, yeah. I agree that there's a lot of talk out there about resilience and positivity. And I talk about gratitude in difficult times. So obviously I've, encountered a lot of this. I just see it as something completely different. I'm not a spring. I'm not going to bounce back, but I am going to show up and be honest with you. And I think that makes me resilient.
I agree 100%. I think that term has been co-opted to try and
sell
force
books
people back into yes. Yeah, because it makes it seem like resilience is very formulaic. Like just do steps 1 through 5 and you'll be back to normal.
Yeah.
And especially with something like this, losing a child, that not only is that impossible, but it's not something that we should even strive for. I don't think that it would be in any way helpful or healthy for things to go back to the way that they were. I already know that they can't, but it wouldn't, I don't see that being something that creates more connection and love and goodness in the world.
And I actually, again, for me, it goes back to, where I feel Stephen around me. Mm-hmm. And I think to deny the grief is to deny the love. I'm not going to do that.
I think that might be one of the things that will stick with me the most out of this conversation, is what you shared about how you responded to people saying unkind things, and things that people said from places of hurt or ignorance or malice, that to engage in that type of being in the world would create a barrier in your connection with Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really beautiful way to move through the world, from this like very positively self-interested place of like, I'm only going to do things that continue to make me feel connected to the people that I love the most.
Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want to say something to some people. Right. I've got a mouth on me. I But I generally try for the most part, 98% of the time, I can observe and move on.
That it's kind of funny because that makes me think about like, it must have been in like the first month after Annie died. I was finding myself like very happily doing like these micro acts of service for complete strangers and feeling like on cloud nine about it. Like, can I take your cart to the cart return for you? Like little things like that, and I think it's only in like hindsight now that it's because those acts of connection and service with other people was like a direct line to like how I felt with Annie. And that's a really beautiful way to think about the work that we do in the world, as being just a through line. It's just an outward manifestation of the inward connection to the bigger picture.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So how many years has it been now since Stephen passed?
So Stephen passed in 2009. So
don't make me math. How many years is that?
15 years, I think it is. Oh my Lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is strange for me to even think about, because it doesn't feel that much time has passed for me. I guess I don't think it ever will. Yeah.
So 15 years, and how would you say your grief is different now than it was maybe in the first, 3 to 5 years?
I feel like I have a better ability to walk with it. Before, I was kind of stumbling up the road and saying, okay, this is, the first few years were raw. It was just very raw. And I would feel like I was doing okay. And then something would happen and I would be in a heap. And I initially thought, when I would have days like that I was regressing, that I wasn't progressing along at a pace that I should, or I wasn't processing something correctly. But now, years later, when something bubbles up, I just kind of say, oh, I guess it's time that I looked at that. I now look at things when they bubble up as, oh, okay, you're ready to look at that now. That's how but it's still there all these years later. When I open the box with the Christmas ornaments and I pull out this, I'm going to send you a picture after the podcast. It's like a styrofoam ball that Stephen cut in half, put an orange pipe cleaner sticking out of it and googly eyes. And this was this snowman that he was super proud of. He was I think he was 3 when he did it. And every year I have very beautiful ornaments that friends have given me over the years. They're thrown in the box. This one is wrapped carefully. It's put into this, special box that I have. And I have one for Brendan's ornaments as well. But every year when I take that ornament out, I look at it and I think about the joy that kid had in life. And I have a little cry. Because the world needs more of that joy. And so years later, I still have those moments. And, as moms, there are moments that we think about our kids and get emotional, whether they're here or not. And that's okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you can think of that you want, any wisdom that you want to impart to listeners before we go? And of course, for everyone listening, I will link to everything that Kelly has put out into the world, her blog and books, and this interview, of course, in the episode notes. But any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you. It's just been incredible being able to talk to you. And I find that being able to talk to another bereaved mom, that we can go a little deeper than most interviews that I have done in the past. And I've been very honest about a lot of things with you today, and I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for taking me there. If there was any wisdom I think that I could leave people with is that you're going to be okay, and that you're going to be okay even if you're up to your neck in mess. You're going to be okay. Listen to podcasts like this one. Seek out people who have had similar journeys. Seek help if you need it. I was a professional in healthcare. I dealt with a lot of death and dying and worked a lot with families. I had nothing in my toolbox when this happened to me. Nothing. And so don't be afraid to ask for help. And just remember that when you have the ability to keep your children close to you in your heart, you just have to have the right mindset to do so. So let go of some of the minutia. There's lots of minutia in this world right now. There's lots of other things that are complex and upsetting. And just make sure to take care of yourself, because that's how you can better remember your child.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for sharing Matthew and Stephen and Brendan with us. Thank you for sharing so much of the tender places inside yourself and in your memories. And I'm certain that people will feel connected to themselves in a deeper way, and connected to you, and connected to just the bigger story for all of us. So thank you. Thank you very much.
So much.
And before we go, for all my listeners, P.S. we expire.